ist ein Stuhl, Schatz. Kannst du hier rüberholen.
Get you a pillow.
Sweaty with a stick, even if it's stage clean. Yeah, right. I don't blame you.
All right, so same as yesterday. First step, setting that structure. We eliminate a lot of things. We make decisions. We choose our angle. We choose our front. And then we set all of that structure so that we can get a really good handle on what we're dealing with. A few areas where I'm not quite sure about. This branch that sits sort of off to the left and to the back had this horrific bow like this. So we tried to pull it in and change the angle and the shape of that branch. This tree's very, very brittle. And this happens a lot in the field-grown trees because there's a lot of deadwood that starts to accumulate in the core of the tree. It turns very, very bright red. There's deadwood on almost every single branch where it's either been bent and sort of died back from that location where there was a little bit of oxygen that got into the vascular system. And again, these are a very, very hard juniper. And hard junipers are ideal because the deadwood lasts a long time, but hard junipers are difficult to wire because that hardness starts to move to the exterior of the tissue. The water conductive tissue starts to shrink, and all of a sudden you get these very brittle branches. And the place where they're the most brittle is right at the joint, where you have two branches that come together that wants to tear apart very easily, so we're having to be extremely careful. Every single junction and joint up in the apex of the tree, when we go to bend it, wants to tear a little bit, so we're just being very, very careful, but we still have to get the movement that we want. Now, as you guys can see, this branch has become extremely important and extremely prominent to anchor the design. So this is where I'm going to start setting the style of the other branches of the tree. I'm going to try to push in on the left side here. I'm going to try to run out on the right side. You can see how I've shifted the apex back, elevated it so that we see all of that movement through the entirety of the trunk, shrink down the size of that apex so it's not that big green dome, and now we've got all the spaces to be able to appreciate the movement that we have in that contrast of the live vein and the deadwood. That's exactly what we wanted to get out of it. It's working out beautifully. I'm very happy with where we're headed. So now it's time to figure out what this is going to look like. You guys have any questions? Yeah?
What did you do with the primary branch? You split it somehow?
Yeah, good question. So the primary branch has this big piece of deadwood that runs all along the branch. And the primary branch, since it's going to be so visible based on opening up the design, to have it just be this straight line and then accept that as the shape of the branch, not very attractive to a tree that has all of these twists and pieces of movement. Our structure has so that you can see exactly where we want to create that window for the opening of the front of the tree. And this helps kind of define and guide the viewer in terms of where's your margin to be looking at. Now the next important branch is this one. I took this big long piece off here. It wasn't doing us much good, and it was keeping a lot of length on this left side. If I want this moving to the right, I've got to really compress on the left side here, right? But this branch starts to form that other margin that guides people when they view the tree, so you know your window to be looking at this piece is right through here. Any other questions? What do you got?
What do you think about the foliage of Taiwan juniper?
Yeah, what do I think about the foliage of Taiwan juniper?
And is it possible to approach? Sorry for my English, because my English
It's better than my French.
to approach about the form of Japanese style, or it's better of maybe more movement, more, for example, Chinese style.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so the question is, what do I think about the foliage of Taiwanese juniper? And is a Taiwanese juniper, should it be approached with the Japanese style? Or should there be more movement and maybe a little bit more space, almost like moving towards the Chinese approach of hinging or something like that? I think this tree was originally handled to look like a Japanese tree, which is one of the difficulties in trying to fix the structure. And so one of the things that we've done, and when this design is finished, I'll talk you guys through sort of the different strategies, what Japanese design would look like, what... This is like a jungle up here. This is crazy. I had like freaking woodpeckers over here, and I got like the sound of the Lion King over there. So I'll talk you through what the Japanese form would be, sort of what that more pinging-ish form would be. But one of the things about a pinging-esque form, or moving more towards the Chinese form, is the branches would have far more movement in them. Because it's already brittle and it wasn't handled that way when it was young, it's very difficult to get that now. So the way that we're going to try to bridge that gap is to create the space and show that movement that exists in the trunk. And that's kind of where my motivation comes from. As far as the Taiwanese juniper foliage, the danger with Taiwanese juniper is the foliage oftentimes goes juvenile. So you can see even in these branches there's a lot of mature foliage, but then there's also a lot of places where there's this juvenile foliage, kind of scale-like foliage that exists. And anytime that you do a heavy reduction, it's going to oscillate between that mature and that juvenile. This is one of the reasons that people oftentimes graft over the Taiwanese juniper with the Shinpaku foliage. I don't personally have a problem with it. I think it's an interesting aesthetic that makes the tree slightly unique from a Japanese bonsai form or a Japanese foyer type. And I always like to try and find that middle ground of how we work with the native foliage to be able to maximize the aesthetic. This is going to be very similar to the Hokkaido juniper that we worked on. It's going to have a longer needle, it's going to have a fluffier form to it. But again, because we've chosen to create a lot more space, the shape and size of the pads is going to be really what dictates whether the design is well executed or not. Any other questions? Lay them on me if you got them. I'm into it. No?